How much bait do you need?
Just a single on its own?
Or all of it? Welcome back to another Syndicate Diaries, and as you know, on all of these videos there is a topic of which I have just addressed in the intro, and we will get onto that in this video. But first thing I always do when I get down here is a lap of the lake, just to familiarise myself with the banks, talk to any other anglers that may be on, and see if I can see any signs of fishing.
I'm Ron Burgundy?
Fishing? Fizzing. Feeding. Sorry, I got sidetracked. We're coming around to this corner and seeing a load of fizzing, which, to be honest, change hands, isn't a strange sight, because so far I've seen bubbling in most swims, which backs up what the one other angler that's currently on here has just told me, in that they seem to be pretty spread out. And when he did a lap of the lake before setting up the other day, he was hard pressed to find any swim that didn't show any signs of fish either feeding on the deck or cruising around under the surface enjoying the sun. And so far I'm about a third of the way around the lake, and every single swim I've seen some bubbling in. So where I go, I'm yet to decide whether it's somewhere that I see an excessive amount of feeding, which of course is going to be the top of the list for a reason of to set out there, or if I go somewhere close to the car, because it is quite a short session. I'm only here until about this time tomorrow. And yeah, as you know, the Syndicate Diaries has been rather lacking on the fish front. I've done a lot of videos this year, one every single week, and I'm happy to say that very few of them have been blanks, but predominantly the videos that are blanks, the predominant videos that have blanks, have been these ones. So I'm very desperate to catch something. It has been fishing quite well recently as well, from what I've seen on the group chat with the odd fish going up on there. The big one came out last week as well, so they're on the feed. There's no excuses. I just need to get more time on here. I've done that video before about time, and this place is definitely one of those that backs up my belief that time is the biggest key to carp fishing, because dropping in here every month, 2 months for a session, I'm just not getting in tune with it. But maybe this is the session where that all changes. Let's continue to walk around, get to a swim, and get fishing. Also, I'm noticing more and more at the moment, the seasons. I mean, we've had a very, very hot, dry summer, haven't we? Which is probably why the trees are struggling. But look at this. It's like autumn. Just want to quickly pause the video right there to talk about the clothing that I wear in all of my videos, because all of it is from Terrain clothing, whether it be my Nothing But Fishing t-shirts and hoodies, or like I'm wearing right now, the beautiful grebe design. It's all from Terrain. 100% recycled materials, 100% ethically crafted, and 100% sustainable. You can not only look good on the bank, but you can do so with a guilt-free conscience. If you like the look of what I'm wearing right now, or want to support the channel by buying Nothing But Fishing clothing, then click the link in the description below, or alternatively the link in the pinned comment. And remember, use code MBF10 for 10% off all clothing, not just mine. Back to the video. What was that wing about? That was unplanned. Finished my walk around, and I've chosen probably the best peg, because that's just happened. How's that for timing? So, I think he's just jumped because I started talking and it scared it probably, but that was a fish no more than 10 feet from the bank. And I've chosen this swim, not because I saw that, but because it's quite central. I've seen some fish on the other side of the lake in this sort of area, and I could trudge my barrow around, but I can fish pretty much the same water from this side. The car is 10 feet to the side of me there, so I can get set up and fish. I've never actually fished this bank, or not this swim, not much of this bank, because I typically go on the other side for the reason that it's quieter. I quite like it around there, but as I've already mentioned, with a short session, not really tiring myself out travelling around, and the fact that I've now seen fish, it seems to make sense to fish here. So, looking at the swim itself, I've obviously got this channel, which is where I did see some fish when I was walking around from the other side, so I can access this, and the next swim isn't until quite a way down beyond those pads, so this water is basically mine all the way around. I've also got some pads just here close in, so I'm going to have a little lead about in a second, get one of the rods out and just find out exactly where I want to fish, but I'm pretty sure it's going to be channel, and one close in. Clearly they get close in. I like the look of having one down the right towards these pads, and we'll choose which baits, or which rod, sorry, we go heavy with the bait. But I have got the bait boat, so I will be able to put a decent amount of bait out in one drop or a couple of drops on the rod that I opt to go with the heavy approach. But yeah, there we are. This is the swim I'm going to be in for the next 20 odd hours, and feeling confident, especially after seeing that fish just rub. I've had a little lead about, and what I've discovered of the swim is pretty much what I'd expect to discover. Regimented depth, pretty much similar bottom all over. And I'm sure if I had a lead about for a long time, I'd find slightly cleaner patches than others, but I don't think that's going to make much of a difference. I'm seeing bubbles everywhere, and each trip I've been here, it's not like they're localised to certain areas, and then when you have a feed on that, it's cleaner. These fish are happy feeding in the silt. They clearly are, because they churn at the bottom, the bubbles come up. So I'm not too fussed about finding really clean areas. And that being said, even the areas that aren't clean, it's not like they're terrible and really silted I can't present nicely. I'm still using my usual go-to running lead clip setup with a bit of tubing, because that will, yes, that might plug into the silt a little bit, but with the rigs I'm using with a semi-stiff coated braid, I'm confident that wherever I drop a rod on here, I'm presented nicely. And as I've said, they're clearly feeding anywhere, so I'm not too fussed about that. I've actually got a rod out, that's the one that just beeped, because as I was doing all lead about, as you would have saw when I first did a piece in this swim, a fish rolled to my left, clearly close in, fish in the area, so I wasted no time in getting a rod down on the right hand side. And I've just put probably 5 whole boilies and 5 boilies which are then broken into halves. I just put that on top. That's not really going to be part of this experiment. It's just down there as my third rod, close in, just off the pads, because I've seen fish here and I hope that that might produce something. The last 2 rods are going to have exactly the same setups on. So as you can see, the rigs are identical. I tied the rigs I'm using up today up last night. They are just my usual bottom bait setup for fishing on sort of silty bottoms, because it's a semi-coated braid, or semi-stiff coated braid, which I've then stripped just down by the hook to give a nice bit of movement. And it's my usual bottom bait choice, which is a trimmed 50mm with a little quad topper, so it just sits up nice, a little bit of buoyancy to make it tip upright, but it doesn't waft around or anything. It sits on the deck, and that should present anywhere I want to drop a rig on this venue. And lastly, as you'll see, I've got little 3-bait stringers on there just to make sure that when that drops on the lake bed, it goes down a little bit slower. It also masks the hook point, so if it does land on any debris, silt or anything like that, once that PVA tape dissolves, those 3 baits fall around it, and it just leaves that parcel of food nice and clear of the bottom. I know that my hook points aren't masked and I'm ready to fish. Now, in relation to the heavy bait approach and the not so heavy bait approach, of course, that's a huge topic which I will talk about a bit more in this video, but I want to put it to practice on this session as well. And it's probably not the best place to do it, because as you know, I've struggled a bit on here. I've not really caught anything of note on here. I've had the odd fish here and there. So doing this test of 1 rod on heavy bait approach and 1 not, the results from this session won't be very conclusive if I do catch, but I'm going to do it anyway. So 1 rod is going to go out there with quite a lot of bait around it. I've got my cell and isofish here, the 2 baits that I tend to use, 15mm and 10mm isofish. One of those is going to go out with whole boilies, chocolate boilies, and some mixed liquid, smart liquid, stuff like that. So stinky heavy bait approach. And the other one is going to be dropped with just the 3-bait string on it, nothing else around it. So there's no attraction other than that, and hoping that fish come along, see a few baits there with nothing else around it, and gobble it up. Now also, another thing that you've got to try and be careful of with this sort of test is that I don't put the rods too close together, that the results are tainted because it's like a rod off the baited patch. I also don't want them too far apart that it becomes spot related. So it's a very loose test. Give me some leeway here, because I'm going to put both rods out in a similar area, far enough apart that one of them is just this with a 3-bait stringer and the other one with heavy bait, but not so far away that, like I said, it's going to be irrelevant test. So they're both going to go in the channel to the left, not really tight to the islands, because I've done that on quite a few sessions here where I fish these swims, and yes, the fish clearly get in tight to the islands, they mill around in the reeds and things, but a lot of the times I see the bubbling, it's not really tight to the pads or the reeds, it's off by a rod length or so. So they're clearly going through these channels and feeding in the centre. So 1 rod's going to go about a rod length off the left side of the channel. 1 rod's going to go about a rod length off the right-hand side of the channel. So they're both in the channel, similar sort of area. It's as close as I can get in this test as possible. 1 heavy bait, 1 no bait. I've probably said the same thing about 4 or 5 times there. it's getting pretty warm. Time to get the rods out, because then I will have about 24 hours of rods in the water doing this test for me. Hopefully they're not in for that long and I actually get some bites and get some results, whether it be on the little bait approach or heavy bait approach or both. Who knows? But that's the idea of this session. Let's get them out, then we will talk a bit more about heavy bait, lack of heavy bait, or not using much bait, or using lots of bait, or using different baits, or time of year, or blah 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 blah. You see where I'm going. And sit back and relax and wait for one of those rods to hopefully go off. Proper lazy carp fishing this, and I'm not going to apologise for it. I'm looking forward to sitting back and not doing much, because I've just come off the back of a session last week where I was at Buzzard Valley Vineyard Lake, which is just north of Birmingham, and it was the polar opposite of this trip. It was up to 33 degrees. Sitting and waiting for the fish just wasn't going to be the one, so I was constantly going around the lake, free lining, and I caught some lovely fish. So that shows that being proactive, even in those conditions, it can pay off. And I'll actually refer back to that session, because when we talk about the baiting approach, I caught all of those fish on that session from free lining either sweet corn or bread and finding them, and I didn't really have anything on the baited rods. But as you know, rods are now out. I've got one out with just the 3-bait stringer, and the other one was actually 2 bait boats loads of bait, and that was crumbed up and sort of mulched up 15mm cell, whole cell, which was covered in stick mix liquid and smart liquid, and Isofish, which is the fishy stinky fish meal one, which is in 10mm, just as whole boilies. 2 lots of that went out, so quite a heavy approach, and that bait boat probably holds, realistically, probably just over 1 kilo per drop. So there's a couple of kilos on that rod, which is quite a heavy bait approach for a session where I'm looking for a bite. So let me know in the comments section what your thoughts are on this session in particular, but also on this topic as a whole, on how heavy should you apply bait to a session, because there's so many different variables that go into this topic that I can't possibly cover it in one video. I'm not an oracle. I don't know all things myself. There's a lot I don't know, and the comment section normally tells me that, which is great, because I learn on these videos as hopefully as much as some of you take away from the videos. And some of those factors will be the time of year, the weather, the venue in question, the stock levels, the oxygen levels, the pressure, the angling pressure around you, carp's behaviours, bite windows. There are so many different variables that go into this topic that I can't possibly come up with a conclusive answer on when you should bait heavily or when you shouldn't. A lot of it comes with experience of different venues, learning a venue, and for this trip, if I'm honest, I don't think the heavy bait approach is going to be the one. Maybe if I was here for a couple of days, then yes, it would, because it gives that bait time to establish, start to work the swim for me. Whereas at the moment, I've just dumped a load of bait on a spot with a rig and hope that more than one fish come up. And that's the other thing, you're wanting, with a lot of bait, more than one fish to feed, because there's a lot of bait there for me to hope them to pick up my rig before they're forced. You kind of want a few fish to come in and start feeding heavily on that for you to get the bite. And whereas the single, that's more of an opportunist option, really, because if a fish comes along, sees a couple of baits down there, it might think, yeah, go on. There's not as much danger there, maybe, because there's not a big dinner plate full of food that's surrounded that just says, eat me and you will be caught. So that's another thing to think of. Trying to put it in more of a visual aspect of carp feeding on a lot of bait versus a little bit of bait is, again, with last week when I was fishing on the surface, when you're putting out dog biscuits or whatever you're using on the surface, that's the best way of seeing carp feed visually, because how often do you see a carp come up and just take one and disappear, take another one and disappear? And if you've done what I've done on this session, put out a load of bait, and there's just 1 or 2 carp coming in, taking 2 or 3 boilies and disappearing, they're going to have to do that for a really long time unless you're lucky, until you actually pick one up. Whereas other times, if you're fishing just free line bread to a group of fish, because your bait is the only thing there, which is what I experienced last week as well, you're more likely to pick up a bite in that situation, in that feeding behaviour for the fish, because they're not competing, they're taking an opportunist bit of food, and that has your hook in it. So that's the only way I can visualise a heavy bait approach on the surface versus very, very small amounts. And On the flip side, when you've got the fish competing heavily on the surface, the best way to keep them there and getting more bites is to keep on feeding them. Once you've got fish competing and feeding heavily on the top, you can get through a bucket of mixers pretty quickly. And that's another great way of showing visually how quick fish can feed on a certain amount of bait. Because if I've just put out, I say, a third of a bucket of bait I've put out now, that in relation to dog biscuits would probably be half a dozen fish or a dozen fish feeding competitively for quite a while to get through that amount of bait. That's a lot of waffling, and I know these topics often are me just sat chatting to camera, but it's me verbally vomiting the thoughts that are going around in my head on heavy baiting approaches. Now, a couple of examples of when these tactics work and don't work. I can only use personal experiences, one of which fairly recently was from the Catch 22 session, where I set myself the challenge of catching 22 fish from the venue Catch 22. Spoiler alert, I succeeded, and I succeeded quite well. I actually ended up catching 24 fish, quite a lot of 20s, and they were pooing out the bait like mad. And that was a very good indication that they were not only visiting my spot, but they were demolishing the bait I was putting out. Now, that's a bit of a different situation because that venue had been shut for 3 years prior to that, so not really any angling pressure at all. I don't know if anyone was dropping on there every now and then, putting any bait in, but I went after a couple of weeks of it being open to people starting fishing. So those fish were very hungry, and I knew in my head and from previous sessions that people had been on leading up to my session that they'd got through a lot of bait. So I knew that going in with a heavy bait approach was probably going to be the best option for those fish, those weather conditions, that venue, that stock level, and it worked. On that trip, I don't think I actually mentioned it in the video, I think I got through 20 kilos of bait in a 48-hour session, and I only fished the days, and they were pooing the bait out all over the place. I think if I'd taken 50 kilos, how hungry those fish were, they probably would have got through it. So that's an example of where a heavy baiting approach and consistently putting bait out and fishing worked, and worked really, really well. But I've tried replicating that on sessions since, and probably since before then as well, using a heavier bait approach, and it's not worked. One of those being last week. Although I said on the Buzzard Valley session I did catch 4 fish, they were all caught whilst free-lining bait, going around the lake, dropping bits of bread on them, bar one actually, which was fish feeding on a margin I had pre-baited, but it was still on a free-line tactic, lowered it on a fish's head, and I managed to hook it. The rods which I had out on the deck, which were out for quite a lot of the session and all through the night, I baited quite heavily in the marginal shelf, or on the marginal shelf, where it was a bit shallower, because I'd seen them patrolling up and down in the day, and I knew that if they followed that same line, which I thought they would, they'd get their heads down and started grubbing about. I put in quite a lot of bait on 2 of those rods, and I did not get a single sniff or a single bite on either of those rods. So that's an example of where the heavy bait approach didn't work. What I don't know, though, is if I just put a single out, like a 3-bait stringer like I have on the middle rod on this session, whether I would have picked up a bite from a fish patrolling through and dropping down. Was there too much bait there that made them think alarm bells? Were they not feeding heavily enough that they may have been taking some, but not enough to get to my rig? This is what I'm chatting about with this topic, is that there's so many variables that goes into heavy baiting approach and light baiting approach that you can't possibly say a definitive, this is right or this is wrong, until you start getting more in tune with this, a session, a venue, carp's feeding behaviour. Bite windows as well is another thing on here. Typically, I don't really know because I haven't caught many fish, but I do know that on a lot of venues, a bite window would be an hour or so before first light and into an hour or so after first light, or right before it gets dark and just after it gets dark. Of course, there's bites all through the day and all through the night on venues, but you can find certain venues have certain bite windows. So would that play a part in when you bait up, how you bait up? Of course, you don't want to fill it in at the time that they're feeding, but also, do you want to stick a load of bait in at a time when they're not feeding at all and it just sits there all day? I don't know. I would love to know your thoughts on this topic in the comment section below. Let me know how you'd approach a 24-hour session like this, where the fish are feeding heavily or have been feeding quite well recently. Would you go just setting traps for the odd bite, which for me, I think I probably should have done. Maybe a small hopper of bait in the bait boat of some crumb and things, just looking for a bite. Or would you do like I've done and dump a load of bait on a spot, sit your rods on it and wait for it? Who knows? Other sessions which have done well with a baiting approach, was B2, my first ever linear session on this channel. It wasn't actually that heavy a bait approach because I was using predominantly worms. So again, this plays into the fact of what you're feeding. Do you put a lot of a good quality bait in, or not very much of a good quality bait, or do you put loads of frozen sweet corn from the supermarket in? There's loads of different things to think of, but I'm using a high quality bait. I know that the fish are feeding. I know it's good for them because I've seen from past experiences this bait being passed on the mat. So I know that if they get a taste for it, when they get a taste for it, it will be digested well. Whereas in the winter, of course, food isn't digested as quickly. The fish are more lethargic. I definitely wouldn't do a heavy baiting approach in the winter. I would be doing more of a singles approach, unless I located the fish and gave them a bit of grab and thought that they might want it. This has got my head worrying. I don't know if this is a coherent piece to camera, but hopefully it's getting you thinking about the whole topic of baiting approach and how do you approach it, because I think a lot of us on a session, especially like a 24 or 48, will start off with finding your spot, 20 or 30 spawns. That's just, you start your spot off. Is that the right approach? Who knows? Let me know. It's an interesting topic, and if this is something you want me to go into more, or talk about other aspects that affects feeding habits, stuff like that, let me know what you want to know. I'll do my own research, try and come up with something a bit more conclusive than just my waffling to a camera. And yeah, I do enjoy these sessions because it gets me thinking as much as hopefully it is making you. We'll see if we get a result on this trip. If not, maybe I'll try it again on a venue which is a bit more heavily stocked, more likely to get bites, or somewhere I'm a bit more confident in and know a bit more about. But yeah, you let me know. I don't know an end piece to this piece to camera, so let's stop there. Oh, I bet you didn't expect this to be the next piece to camera. I'm actually sat in front of my mat with a fish in the net. Not gonna lie, it is certainly no monster, but when you've been on a dry spell on a lake as long as I have on here, any fish is very welcome. And this, guess which one it came on? That's right, the margin rod. That's nothing to do with this video, but I was pretty sure I had a bite on the way because the fish started showing up. They were showing just to the right of my swim, actually, but slowly getting closer and closer to my swim. And I'd actually had, you can tell it's that small, but the sound was making in the mat. I actually had a sort of, it looked like a take on this rod only about 5 minutes prior, to the point it was such a savage liner or lift up of the bobbin. I actually struck it, nothing on the end, no signs that anything had actually picked up the rig. So I think it was just quite a slow and steady liner that started to pull the tip round, and I was on the rod pretty quick. This one, there was no doubt in my mind that it was a bite because I'm fishing pretty locked up, excuse me, next to those pads. So it was a few beeps, looked up, and the rod was smacking round. And this is the culprit. If he lets me hold him up, he's quite a lively little fish. There we go. He's finally calmed down a little bit for me to hold him up for you. Probably around the 6-7 pound mark. So certainly not one of the monsters that's in here. And I seem to be ticking off the smaller fish when I do eventually catch on here. But like I said, after having so many sessions with no fish, it's nice to see the correct species. It's not a tench in my net, and it's just before it goes into the night. So before he flips, I'm going to put him back down and get that rod back out on the pads just to my right, and hope that we can catch something a little bit bigger than this one, but very welcome all the same. A fish in the Syndicate Diaries. Well, good morning is the correct way of addressing you, because it's just gone at 3 AM and one of the rods which is part of the trial has gone off. I'll reveal which one it was in the morning because I'm not in a awake enough state to talk about the results, what that means so far, but it is actually my biggest from the Syndicate so far. At 21 pounds, 6 ounces. Very, very welcome. And it was the most timid of bites. A couple of beeps on the rod and then nothing more. I just watched the tip and it knocked a couple of times. So I got out and I was just sat watching the rod and thought, what is going on? So alarm, I turned it off, tightened down a bit with the line because it looked like it had gone a little bit slack. And a couple more little knocks. I thought, was there a roach on the end or something? And it just went slack. So I picked it up and thought, something's going on. Wound. And it moved quite a distance. And this is the result. So happy days. Feely's about to flip, just put him down. I'll show you the other side. Well, a bit of a weird growth on one shoulder. Other than that, beautiful fish. It gave most of the battle just under the rod tips. I thought he was in the net probably 4 or 5 times. Each time, that was the mat, not me. Each time, he then bolted off again. And as you see, it's a lovely, long, lean common. Oh, happy days. Try and get a still from the video because it is the middle of the night. I don't want to keep them out too long. That'll do. One for the camera. And it's getting back. The rod is now back out. It's probably just gone 3:30, so let this rest for 10 minutes whilst I got the rod back out. And let's see if we can build on this as well. But 2 fish on the same session. We're already on par with my best ever session on here before. We've still got the rest of the darkness hours, which is probably only about an hour and a half really. And then most of tomorrow morning as well, so results. Well, good morning, and it was a glorious sunrise. I took the drone up before going straight back to bed because it was a lovely, beautiful sky, and once the sun came up it kind of went behind cloud and went a pretty miserable morning, so I got the best of the morning and then headed back to bed and got probably another hour or so sleep. And last night was a productive one, as you would have saw. I had the first fish of the trip, which was on the pads, which is that small mirror, and then at 3 AM I had that common, and I did say I tell you in the morning what rod that was on. Can you guess? It wasn't the pads rod, it was on one of the ones that was within the test. It ended up being the single. So the baited rod, the heavily baited rod, has done nothing. The pads rod, which wasn't really in the test, that had just sprinkling the bait around it, has done a bite. And then the single, the 3 bait stringer, so just that rig really out there, is what did the bite last night. So it's not conclusive, of course. There's loads of variables, as I mentioned in this video. This is just one session, and it could have just been that's where the fish was on this trip. But they were fairly close to each other, and it's interesting to see that the rig with no bait around did the bite. So we don't really have to bait heavily on a venue which recently has been feeding really well, has been doing lots of bites. Just setting a little trap on an area where I thought the fish might be is what was enough to get me the bite. So I hope you've enjoyed this video. I hope you've enjoyed the topic that I've discussed and rambled about myself, but I hope you get involved in the comment section below as always, as you guys seem to always do, which is great to see because I learn from it. Hopefully other people learn from it, and it gets us discussing a topic each time. What the topic will be next time, I'm not sure. Maybe put some suggestions in the comment section below as well. But that is the end of this session. I do need to bring the rods in now. It's been a productive session. I've got this video filmed. I've been editing the Holland video, which will be up before this video goes live. I've had some work meeting calls, so there was lots going on behind the scenes of Nothing But Fish. There's some really exciting stuff, which I can't wait to tell you about in the future. And of course, the best way to know about all of that is to subscribe to me if you haven't already for the weekly uploads minimum. And also on my social media platforms, Instagram, Facebook and TikTok, where all of the behind the scenes and extra stuff goes up. But yeah, lots going on, lots to get excited about. And yeah, let's see where Nothing But Fishing goes. And actually on this session, we ticked over 47,000 subscribers. And my goal for this year was 50,000. So if you're not subscribed yet and you're enjoying what you're watching, please do help me hit that 50k goal before the end of the year. But that is it from this session. It's getting a bit warm in this hoodie. I need to pack down, head home, and get out fishing again later this week for the next video. I'll see you in the next one. Cheers, guys.